Welcome back to Life in Cyber. Let's tech to it.
If I wasn't doing cybersecurity and I could choose like a real job that was cool, I think it would be voice acting.
Give us a voice.
A voice of what?
I mean, any voice.
Like,
other
pick a
than
show, and what voice would you do for that show?
I've only ever heard you do one voice, Shannon.
Nothing? Like, oh, golly!
Something like that, yeah.
Golly, I got a story to tell.
All right, quick off-topic talk. First of all, our topic today is banning software from foreign countries. We'll get into that a little bit, but I do have a kind of a random thought. Not really random. Current event. Google released their Pixel 9, and one of their new features that I find a little strange, I want to get your guys' thoughts on, is their new Add Me feature, where you can take a picture, leave space for yourself in the picture, and then someone else will switch and you go into the picture, making this artificial picture that didn't really exist. I don't know if you guys saw it.
Sounds like a wet dream for lonely people.
No, so it's
fair,
like an advancement to their Magic Eraser. So say you're in a situation where you're trying to take a group picture. So you're taking a group picture, and there's three of you, say, right? Someone's got to take the picture because no one else is around to take this picture. You take a picture of two, then the guy that takes the picture then goes and places himself within that scene that's basically like shadowed over, your background, and then they put themselves into it. Check out the clip for it. It's very strange.
So do they take two different photos?
Yes, two different photos, and like augment reality merges them together.
Okay, so theoretically, a lonely person like, say, Pats of the world could take a picture of a chick and then have someone take a picture of him and then just like merge the two and bam, you have a girlfriend now or boyfriend.
Sort of.
I don't think that's how relationships work.
But yeah, it would have to be in the same background. It's all in the same space. Like, it can't be like two different pictures. That's Photoshop.
Well, if you're at Walmart, just
so wait for some some hot chick to like buy something and then like move into that same space and be like,
exactly, be like grocery shopping with my girlfriend. And then
I guess she could.
Okay, here's the part. Here's the part where I think it might actually be kind of fun. Like, because for the most part, I think this is a little weird, kind of creepy, but it could be fun. Let's say, like, if you can find the movie set for the Titanic, and you can put yourself where Leonardo DiCaprio was standing, and put yourself in that photo where he's like holding you from behind, and you're just all happy in the back. I would love that. I'd love Leo wrapping his arms around my waist. That would be great.
But you could do that with Photoshop.
It's true, but this is easier Photoshop. It does it for you.
It's Autoshop.
I guess it's a neat feature. I don't know who was sitting at Google Corp just being like, it'd be great if I could merge with Steve.
I think I would say, like, who asked for this, but then now I'm just picturing myself on the Titanic, and I can't stop. Won't stop.
It's definitely one of those situations that I looked at. I was like, who really thought of this? Like, ultimately, I guess it's a good idea, but it's still a fake picture. I think that was a big problem with like their Magic Eraser. Erase people from the background. It's like, but that didn't happen. Or their fixing of smiles, where people like you take multiple pictures and you can change the face to the one that's smiling. So it's an interesting idea. It's basically, like I said, it's like auto Photoshop for certain situations.
For lonely people, yes.
Sure.
That's basically what it is.
Anyway, so to ban or not to ban, not so recently, we heard about the U.S. government banning Kaspersky software, and I think we've seen different things like that. We've seen them talk about TikTok as well. How do I guess I want to discuss like how do we feel about these foreign developed software being banned within our country or anywhere for that matter? Are there good reasons, bad reasons, or is it government overreach?
I see both sides. And I think it is a slippery slope because at first it's going to start out with foreign software like Kaspersky. We're afraid of a nation state attack where they're going to use all of the agents with Kaspersky to get and infiltrate our computers, basically. But I think it's going to eventually make its way into wherever they want it to go. Private software, private industries.
So I guess let's go over all the bad reasons then. Or what's the cons here? What are they? What do you think they're trying to prevent, other than I guess the nation states using it as a backdoor into American computer systems?
I personally think this is a little nuanced, and I think if we're to talk about basically why a government might want to do this, so like the case for banning, is that what we're?
Yeah, let's do case for banning first.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sorry, I was making sure I understood your question, but going towards like why we would ban something, right? I think obviously the message we keep hearing repeatedly is national security, right? And that's what they're talking about with Kaspersky specifically with regards to Russia. And then we hear it with TikTok with regards to China. And in fact, we saw it recently as well with not just software, but technology. We saw Huawei get banned in the United States, right? So we used to have phones and all of that because, and from what I understand, and this is something I haven't like read extensively on, but what I understand is there was basically hard coded into the firmware that it would be sending stuff back to the Chinese government, sending data back to the Chinese government. And to one question or to one point, it would be like, okay, well, our government's collecting data about us. What are they going to do with it, right? What's the difference? But on the other side of it, I understand that like we see a lot of issues with social media and stuff when it comes to like interfering with elections or even just like changing the public's opinion on something, right? You can see that with like the Cambridge Analytica scandal. But we also see a lot of issues with just software in general where there is a potential risk that they're either collecting data or they may even, in some cases, be legally obligated to leave an opportunity for the government to be able to use their software as a backdoor into something. So there is some risk with rival nations when it comes to this. So I do think that national security is a fair concern here. It's one where I kind of sit on the fence about it because they're very quiet about that stuff. Like we don't get a lot of evidence of that with like obvious reasons, but it is one of those things where it's like, okay, it kind of makes logical sense at least.
I think it also pushes it more towards standardization. More US based products are going to go into the industry because of this. I wish I knew off the top of my head which manufacturers were which, like, I don't want to say like CrowdStrike, for instance. Great product, guys. Also McCaffrey, Norton, things.
McCaffrey. You got football on the mind there, Shannon.
McCaffrey.
He's over there thinking about drafting Christian McCaffrey already.
You know, I have the number 10 overall pick, so I don't think that's a reality.
It's not a reality.
But we're playing keepers this year, so I get to keep Kyron Williams, who I got in free agency. Suck it all.
I will point out, though, on the national security point, though, right? Like we talk about how Russia or China could attack us with that, and there are some people who are going to be like, "Well, you guys are so paranoid." Let's go the other direction. Do you guys remember Stuxnet?
Yes.
So Stuxnet, for anybody that doesn't know, that was a malware that supposedly that nobody's taking full responsibility, but it's kind of public knowledge at this point. The U.S. and Israel partnered together to push on Iran against their nuclear program. This was basically packaged into software that we owned that we used against a foreign government. Like, if we're capable of it, they're definitely capable of doing it back, right? So that's where I'm getting at when it comes to the national security thing. It makes sense. Like, and this was like Stuxnet was 2005. Like we're talking 20 years ago. It's probably way more sophisticated today.
Um,
Besides national security, so one of the things that I know we kind of threw in the notes here for today, and like one of them is protecting intellectual property, and I think this is definitely one that I can definitely see as a reason to block it. I know we've seen in the past China was constantly taking a lot of our products and remanufacturing them as fakes and then selling them. I know us as network guys and in IT, Cisco's had a huge reputation of having fake versions of their hardware all over the place, making stuff like that, and then you could easily use that and put a back door in there, and then maybe you're taking other intellectual property out, or besides just trying to hack into different nations, you could use it as a way to hack into your competitor. So there's always the corporate espionage side of it.
I'm interested to see where it goes. Like, I almost want to download Kaspersky and then put it on a computer and just see if traffic just like stops getting sent. Like, are they going to block it at the ISP level? Just be like, you are no longer allowed to communicate with these servers.
I mean, a lot of their servers are in the US. I know after the first initial like slap on the wrist they started giving for that back in the day when NSA agent decided to copy some of his tools over to his personal machine, and their system decided to let's upload that to our servers because we have no idea what this software is, to see if it was malicious. And I think, speaking of Israel, I think their own spies were in Kaspersky systems and like, hey, I see a US tool over there, we should let them know. So I don't know if they're fully blocking it. I don't know if the ISPs really even have the bandwidth for that, to be perfectly honest. Like, if I worked at an ISP, that's the last thing I'd be worried about. But at the same time, we've seen some of the things guys like Comcast worry about. So never know.
Not my upload speeds, I can guarantee you that.
Well, and going to your like intellectual property talk, going back to that really quick. One of the things we saw in China in the last decade is they implemented like a really strict crackdown and policy, essentially like pushing foreign tech companies out so that they could replicate the services within China. Like, and to be fair, like the reasoning behind this is kind of all over the place, but the key point there is they're really trying to be economically independent, right? And when you are a country of that size, and you are basically a rival to basically all of NATO, which is the rest of the global economy, essentially. Uh, yeah, I mean the likelihood of war is pretty high, and they're essentially like hedging their bets, saying, okay, if that happens, at least our economy is not going to crash, and we'll be able to like survive that, right? So I think from a geopolitical standpoint, like their push towards that level of independence in the tech sector is wise, and it's important for a lot of countries who are predicting future conflict to kind of take a maneuver like that. But seeing them push out companies like that, that caused like essentially caused the death of Vine and caused the rise of TikTok, right? And we've seen a lot of other companies going the same way. Like Huawei came up in a similar fashion. And then we see that they actually put like requirements for Huawei to send data back, right? So and they're really cracking down hard on tech. Although I'm seeing rumors that they've kind of been lightening up as their stock market's been having a bit of a hard time this year. But to be fair, we all are. But no, that is where I get into that like intellectual property conversation of like they're literally trying to duplicate all of the companies that we see in other countries, so that way they don't have to rely on them in order to provide similar services, right?
I used Kaspersky for a long time, both personal and the corporate edition, and I just kind of feel bad because I've worked with them for so many years that I actually developed relationships with some of the employees over there, to the point that I like knew things about their families and things like that. So it kind of sucked when July 20th hit and they announced that they were shutting down their US headquarters. All of the people that I knew were just out of jobs.
So I guess that kind of segues us into the reasons not to ban. Obviously, it's going to cause our own issues, economic issues. Like you said, a lot of people losing their jobs, unfortunately. After many years of working with them, I've also used Kaspersky on both levels. Um, and, when that first time it came through, I had to start wiping it out of the machines that I had from a corporate level. Because, as a government contractor, though the government at the time wasn't really banning it, they were shunning it completely to the point where all our all the people that we had in constant contact with different government agencies were pretty much like, we need to get it off because they're asking about it. And I'm like, okay, off it goes. So it sucks. Like you said, there's a lot of jobs. What I really wonder most about is probably the effectiveness of it. Obviously we've seen those cases like Huawei and stuff like that, but the long-term effects of this, I don't personally see it being a good thing. Because then we also are, stifling competition. Like we need that competition. We need guys to push each other. Like, yes, in the US we have some pretty strong companies, CrowdStrike, Palo Alto, all these companies that are really making their own software in this realm, but that foreign competition is also very big, and trying to fight them in their markets and fighting each other in each other's markets, I think, is really what pushes and tests these companies to the fullest.
It drives innovation.
Yes.
Is really what it does. But, I felt bad with them because when the government started shunning them originally, they made an initiative, or they made an effort. They made a U.S. headquarters. They moved a lot of their stuff to U.S. centric, and they made it to where the U.S. based organizations would try and reach out to the U.S. based servers first. And then if for whatever reason it had to, then it would call out to the Russian servers. But they even tried to make it to where you could set a setting in there to where under no circumstances would you get your definitions or anything like that from the Russian-based servers. In all truthfulness, though, there were times that I caught it to where I applied that setting and I could still see it calling home. So it does make you wonder. I just wish the transparency was there from the government standpoint of, we are blocking this, this is why, and this is what we've seen, and we're justified behind it, instead of, we're getting you off of it, you have no say in it because we said so. Now go sit in a corner.
So I'll be the last person to praise late stage capitalism. I'm not a huge fan of it, but what I will say is having a free market has a lot of benefits and can be very pro-consumer. Like we're in a situation right now where we're not seeing that, and I'm hoping that the Google antitrust lawsuit that's going on right now will probably change some of that. We'll see. But like, we live in a world of tech giants right now, right? But that's from our own failure internally. That has nothing to do with this concept. But I do believe that the point of competition and having competition in any sector, and especially tech, is incredibly important to like ensure that consumers are getting value over time, right? Like we see with a lot of tech giants, we've seen this with Cisco, we're seeing it with a bit with VMware, we've seen it with companies that are just so massive that when they have such a good product for such a long time, they focus so much on that growth over time, and then they'll buy out their competitors, and they get to a point where they almost have a monopoly, or at least they've captured so much market share that they no longer have to worry about like giving back value. And Adobe's another concept, another company that's like this, where they just squeeze more and more out of who's there, and then the quality of the product decreases. That can be an opportunity for competitors to rise up, and by banning some of those potential international competitors, like we're allowing these companies to continue that squeeze. So I could see this, creating issues in that competitive market. Like we need competition in order for us as consumers to get value. And I think a lot of us have been frustrated in the tech sector because that value has been depleting as the costs have been increasing dramatically, right?
I just don't think this is going to get what the government wants as a whole. I don't think it's going to eliminate the threat, because a new one is just going to get introduced from another vector. I feel like they're using it as a scapegoat. More and more, the vendors are becoming the threat, basically. The amount of agents that we have to put on endpoints anymore for miscellaneous tasks.
CrowdStrike.
Yep.
We pick on them too much.
CrowdStrike, SolarWinds, now Kaspersky. First Kaspersky, then SolarWinds, then CrowdStrike, then Kaspersky again.
But no, I definitely agree. I think there's a little bit of a, I guess, scapegoatism. Is that a word? Where it's just, it's the easier thing for them to do, right? It gets to the point where it's just like, there's ways we could do this on a more political level. I think at one point Kaspersky, as much as we're talking about them, did offer up to say, "Hey, here's my source code. We will show it to anyone who wants to see it from the government standpoint."
Mhm.
But I think it's just like, we had this one incident and we just want to prevent any chance of it happening again. So we're just going to ban it all.
Yeah, and I'll say too, like there's a lot of economic implications behind bans and stuff, right? Like the problem, like globally, our economies are all kind of intertwined, and I think with the mass adoption of the internet that we saw in the late '90s, early 2000s, like that kind of just made that even more so, right? Like how many things are we buying from international companies, but we're just going to Amazon, right? Like we don't know any better. Like we're just clicking buy because it's a product and it's on Amazon, right? It's easy to buy. But we've seen so much of that being a global supply chain, and we see this, like those economic relationships are really important, but we're seeing like this economic strain happening kind of across the entire globe, and we're seeing it with people talking about housing prices. We're seeing it with inflation, and it's not just in the United States. This is everywhere. In fact, the United States is one where it's relatively bad for us who, like, we feel it pretty bad when we're here, but it's way worse everywhere else. And by doing these like turtling types of tactics where we kind of hole up and say, no, we can't do that, we're going to increase tariffs or whatever, like that just kind of increases prices as well. And then banning specific products just makes it even harder to find products that we need, right? So that creates an economic pinch, but it also creates tension with those economic partners that we did have, where they no longer want to work with us on other things, right? So if we ban one product, maybe they'll ban one of ours, and that causes our companies to struggle. That can cause our people to lose jobs, right? And so the more that we do that, it kind of becomes this trade warfare. And the only people that suffer are really us, right? Like as consumers, we're the ones that take the full brunt of that kind of warfare. And so that's not necessarily something that I'm interested in or really about. And I think we're all feeling that economic pinch. I mean, the number one reason that people are quoting now why they're not having kids anymore, and we keep talking about demographic cliffs and stuff, is because housing prices are too high, or like economically they just can't afford it, right? And so if we keep creating these economic pinches by making moves like banning products or whatever it may be, like that's just going to put like the global population at risk, and that's going to impact the economy even more in the long term. Like there's so many short-term decisions being made that we're not thinking like 50, 60 years ahead like we should be as a government, right?
I think people don't want to have kids anymore because one day people woke up and they realized that kids are jerks. And you make dinner for them and you say, here's your chili. And they say, I don't want chili. And they won't eat it. And then you say, okay, well, here's your chili. And they go, I don't want chili. And then you're like, well, eat it. No, I don't want it. And then you say, okay, well, here's your bean soup. Oh, I like bean soup. And then they eat it.
So on that,
That's my reason.
just so you know, your kids are half you. So just remember, it's funny because I told this to a friend and colleague the other day. I'm like, I think the most annoying part about having kids is when you see yourself in them, because they're just as annoying and they'll pull the same tricks on you that you would, if you truly think about it, you're like, crap it, that was me. That was all me right there.
I deserve that.
I did that to my parents and now I'm getting it. But anyway, so how do we find a balance here, right? Can we find a balance? I think what Shannon said earlier, I think goes back to, I think what we'd like to see is transparency. Like, let us know why. If we just had a clue or some kind of inkling of what or why we're doing something, we might be like, all right, fine, I get it, I'll move on. But I think transparency is sometimes, without getting too political, is just too hard, too big of an ask from our government.
I think it's too big of an ask because there's stuff that they know that would absolutely terrify us if we were to find out what it was. At the same time, you got to manage chaos and keep the masses okay with it. Most people don't even know what Kaspersky is or how to properly pronounce it, so they're just like, okay, it's a computer thingy mahoo. I'll let it go. I don't know where it's going to go. I think it's the first time the U.S. has actually tried to do something like this. I think it's a slippery slope. I think eventually it can be used as a way to pivot into the private sector and, use it as a way to discipline tech giants. Google didn't pay their taxes, and you can't use Google Chrome this year.
Yeah, and then I think there's always the slippery slope of how far it can go with that, because at some point, do our do lobbyists have the power to then push for something to get banned so that their product can be better? So it is a very slippery slope. I think that's kind of the worst case scenario, but yeah, I'm a little worried about that as well.
I think our biggest issue in the U.S. is that our Congress is very tech illiterate, right? We've got a few members that are, but they can't get any traction. And the other biggest issue we have in the United States is that our politicians are more focused on can they get reelected than actually like pushing the nation forward at this point. And it's been like that, I don't know, for at least the last 8 to 10 years or so. And maybe longer. Maybe it's always been that way, but it seems like it's shifted more that.
It's more obvious now.
But where I see like some regulation actually happening that is kind of holding these tech and software companies accountable is the EU, right? I think they're actually pretty good about this stuff, and they're definitely farther along than we ever will be. So yeah, I do think there is a way to implement like assessments of like risk assessments of software, and trying to take things case by case, like implementing certain regulations saying, you can't send this kind of data back to a rival country, blah, blah, blah. But we need a way to like enforce that in the sense of like, how do we check their code? Like you mentioned earlier, like Kaspersky offered source code and we're just like, no, we're good. It's because we don't have a process for it, but we could create, basically a government entity that has the ability to do that. We just don't. Right. And that's where I look at like, we could do it better. I think there is an opportunity there. We just need the desire and the willpower to do so in the US. And I think the EU is kind of showing off a little bit in that regard. Now, they're not perfect either, but they're much further along than we are, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you said. I think we need some leadership that actually knows what the hell they're talking about. Not to go too far off on a rant, but sometimes it's pretty funny to watch them question tech giants on TV. It's like, wow, you're an idiot. Quick laugh and then move on. But I think that's it. I don't know how far we could beat this one, but
hey, don't ever doubt my ability to take a topic and talk forever. I've got like 3 more rants in me if you let me.
No.
No, thanks for joining us tonight. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.
Screw you guys.